Thank you for inviting me today. My name is Sara King. I work for Rewilding Britain, but I also live in Somerset. So although I'm going to be talking about the national picture today, I'm also local to Somerset and I'm really interested in rewilding the county as well. So I'm just going to start by telling you a little bit about us as an organisation, and then I'll move on to talking about rewilding in general. So Rewilding Britain is a charity. We operate across the whole of Britain at a national level, and we have three main areas that we focus on, and that includes catalysing rewilding across Britain, which is where my role comes in, and I'll talk a little bit more about that throughout this presentation. We're also trying to influence policy and influence different areas to make sure that we're removing barriers to rewilding to help to catalyse that further. And we do a lot of work engaging people on what rewilding is. So talk companies in particular is that rewilding really has taken off, and that engagement in rewilding and the hope that it brings. It's really quite exciting. And I think some of the projects that I'm going to try and show you today are really quite inspirational on how we can take a slightly different approach to some areas of our countryside. So just a quick, I'm not going to look too much at the definition of rewilding, but it's really important to kind of describe our definition of rewilding, just so that you can see where we're coming from. So rewilding is the large-scale restoration of ecosystems to the point where nature can take care of itself. So it's a process, and it's a long-term process, one that's probably going to take hundreds of years. But it's looking at putting those pieces back in place at the moment to our ecosystems and allowing nature to dominate and those natural processes to take effect. And although you can rewild it at all sorts of different scales, and every bit of rewilding really does help, we do need to look large scale. We need to look at how can we connect up the smaller areas of rewilding and give nature the space to really allow processes to dominate. So rewilding also encourages a balance between people and nature. We are actually a part of these ecosystems, and it's work with nature instead of against it, so that we can thrive together. That's a really important part of rewilding. We also have 5 principles of rewilding as an organisation. So this splits out that definition into smaller segments. And those 5 principles of rewilding are making sure that we're supporting people and nature together. As I said, we're very much a part of nature, and it's making sure that we can focus on how rewilding can include people. Working at nature scale, giving nature that space to really see transformation across our whole landscapes. Letting nature lead, and it's quite a scary prospect, but also a really exciting one to actually think maybe there are some areas where we can let nature take the lead more and be less prescriptive. Creating resilient nature-based economies and enterprises, and I'll talk a little bit about that in my talk today. And also thinking long-term and securing benefits in the long term. This is a long-term process. It might take decades, if not hundreds of years, to really restore wildlife. It's about putting that in place now to allow that to happen. And I was having a few conversations really about how I'm quite impatient when it comes to you need to take a step back and let nature take the lead, and understand that sometimes nature works a little bit slower, but we can help to kickstart it in some places. So I'm just going to play a really short video about the Rewilding Network. So the network's a community of projects that are rewilding, and this video really is just showing the vast diversity of different approaches. These are all real projects across the whole of Britain, and you can see that no one rewilding project is the same. They're all taking different approaches, they've got different habitats, they've got different species there. And I think that's one of the really exciting things about rewilding, is that there is no one size fits all. There's a lot of innovation in there. And you can also really get a sense of place through rewilding. One of my, what I find really exciting about rewilding is that you can see that sense of place through the different habitats and the different species and different breeds of livestock that might be supported on those rewilding projects. And I'd love to be able to see it at a time where you can move through the countryside across the whole of Britain, and you can recognise where you are based on the habitats or the species that are there. And although you can in some areas, we've got some really great pockets of habitat where you can do that, but a lot of the countryside does look quite similar now as you move through it. And I think rewilding can really start to restore some of that. So what are the benefits to rewilding? There are quite a lot, but some of the main benefits to rewilding is that it can draw down carbon from our atmosphere, can lock carbon into our soils and our habitats to store them and prevent them from being emitted into our atmosphere or into our water. We know that it can help wildlife adapt to climate change, and it can create really resilient systems for wildlife. As the world and the UK is likely to heat over the next few decades, we are likely to see some species needing to move further north. So it's really important to have these connected landscapes with a whole diversity of different habitats and areas and niches for these species to allow them to move and to allow them to move through the landscape and also the seascape. There is a lot of biodiversity loss that has happened, we know that. The UK is ranked 189th out of 218 countries for biodiversity intactness, which is quite staggering and shocking that the UK is in that situation. And through nature recovery, but also through rewilding, we know we can restore some of that biodiversity. Not just species richness, but also the abundance of those species. And abundance is such an important element. We get quoted a lot of times that you don't see as many invertebrates around anymore, you don't get as many insects on your car windscreen, or whatever it is when we're looking at the shifting baseline. I think it's really important to start to restore some of that abundance, and then we'll see wildlife thrive around that. Rewilding can support diversified nature-based economies, and we've just recently released a report on this. So if you do want to read that, it's a really great report on how we can start to underpin rewilding with some nature-based enterprises. And I think one of the things that COVID and lockdown has shown us is how important nature is for our health and well-being. And getting out in nature is just so important. So I think rewilding can really provide that opportunity to restore some really high-quality areas for us to enjoy. So just a little snippet of some of the evidence that we've started to build up as part of the rewilding network that we've been developing. This slide actually does need to be updated because we've done a study that includes some more of the sites now. But we did some analysis of over 20 sites across England and had a look to see how many jobs those sites supported. And within 10 years of rewilding, we actually now have seen a 50% increase in jobs. And that's just not more jobs, but a more diverse range of jobs, from ecologists to stockmen, still farmers and land managers, but also tourism and ecotourism opportunities that are coming through from that. So this can really start to show that rewilding can support jobs in our rural areas where they're needed. We've also seen a 9-fold increase in volunteering opportunities. So not only have we got more jobs on this land, but we've got more people volunteering on these lands. And again, it's opportunities from wardens to education, through to helping out with removing fencing, or keeping an eye on the livestock and doing welfare checks. And this is really important because not only is it giving communities the opportunities to get involved in these sites, but it also means that they're getting involved, they're able to spend more time in the outdoors, and we know what the welfare and health benefits to that are. But also important to note that all the sites still support grazing animals, and all the sites still produce wild meat. So there is still that production side of things that come in as part of Rewilding Britain. And these are just a few of the enterprises that we've started to see coming through from the network, through to a whole load of new ecotourism and wildlife watching opportunities, through to still some food production. We see a lot of gin and spirit production as well coming out of rewilding projects, which is great. Education opportunities, school visits, as well as some of the traditional land management practices like dry stone walling still happens within our rewilding projects. And I'm just going to play you a short video. This is at Uplands, so it's not so relevant to most of Somerset, but it gives you an idea of how we can start to rewild some of these landscapes. So we're starting with a typical upland area. We can see a lot of monoculture plantation. And then in the medium term, we start to change this and allow natural processes to lead the way. The river starts to re-wiggle. We can see more trees and natural regeneration. And then maybe this is a slightly exaggerated version of what it could look like in the long term. I'll just pause it so it stays on that view. But it gives an idea of how we can think a little bit differently. We've got more trees in this landscape. It's messier. We don't have these straight plantations and just grassland for as far as you can see. We've got more trees in this landscape. You'll see the river is meandering and working as it should. If you look closely, you'll see that big pool at the bottom that's got a beaver dam that's holding back some of those waters. We've got a very interesting lynx in the picture, which again might be a bit optimistic, but is something that we can consider. But also there's people within this landscape. There are people working and there's nature-based enterprises. So it's not about moving people out, but working with those natural processes. And I just wanted to play that to start to see how we can start to rethink some of our landscapes, make them a little bit messier, a little bit mosaic-y, and start to blur some of those lines a little bit further. So just onto the Rewilding Network, which is my main role with Rewilding Britain. And this is less than 1 year old now. It's a community of land managers, project managers, landowners, who are all rewilding land across Britain. And if you go onto our website, you'll see a much more up-to-date map than this one that shows all the projects that are rewilding across the whole of Britain. And if you click on those pins, you'll start to see a case study project page for each of the projects that starts to provide an overview of all the different approaches that are happening. And we are now extending this out to the marine environment as well, because it's really important to make sure that we look at land and sea when we're looking at a whole system approach. But the really powerful thing about this map is not just showing the whole diversity of different approaches to rewilding, but it also shows the sheer amount of rewilding that's happening across the whole of Britain, and the movement really is growing. And if we look at the number of hectares that are going into rewilding, it is starting to build, and it's building all the time. And I think that gives us also hope and inspiration that we can start to have a different approach to some areas where it's appropriate. It won't be appropriate in all areas. We're also starting to build the evidence base and looking at how these sites can start to join up. So this is a map, much more detailed map that we've pulled together. The red dots that you might not be able to see are where the rewilding projects are. And then we can start to overlay things like we've got bug life beelines on here. We can start to overlay nature recovery networks. We're doing some work at the moment to look at where the rewilding corridors are across the whole of Britain. And when we start to bring this in and we start to link that up to other initiatives like nature-friendly farming and regenerative agriculture and the nature reserves that we have, we can really start to see how these sites can all be connected up for wildlife and make a much bigger impact than a site individually can. So I think that's really important to start to see how these landscapes can join up and how all these different approaches can work together. So I'm just going to go through some of the example projects across the network just to show you some of the things that are happening across Britain. So we're going to start up in Scotland, in southern Scotland, where we've got the site called the Wild Heart of Southern Scotland, which some of you may have heard of. The Carafran project is part of this. And they've been doing some really exciting work over the last 20 years to plant trees within this valley. I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but if you look at this middle picture, you can see what it looked like a few years ago. Now it's full of trees. And it really is quite inspiring to see how that's happened. And that's happened through volunteering as well as through getting contractors in to come and tree plant a lot of trees, hundreds of thousands of trees. And the reason why tree planting is needed in this area is because there's no natural seed source for the trees. So that natural process needed to be kick-started because there weren't any trees left in this valley. And it's really exciting to see natural regeneration happening now within this area and starting to see some of the biodiversity that's returning. Down to the Lake District, we've got a nice little collection of projects that are in the Lake District National Park, including the Lowther Estate, which is a large-scale private estate. Again, where they're trying to kickstart natural processes by taking down a lot of the internal fences, bringing in cattle and horses and beavers to come in and restore these wetlands and restore a more natural process of extensive grazing by low-density animals. And they're at the very start of their journey, but it's exciting to see this grazing happening over quite a large area. Through to RSPB Haweswater, which some of you might have seen if you saw the Lakes programme at the weekend. They were near Haweswater. But this is an RSPB reserve, another large estate, where they are trying to rewild, but also mixing that in with farming practices and farming practices that work with nature. So again, you start to see this natural regeneration of trees. They've done some supplementary tree planting, and they've restored a lot of the native ponies and cattle into this area as well, including the native fell pony, which has a lot of cultural identity in the area. So it's really exciting to see that happening and see some of these new trees starting to poke through. Down to Dorset, so a little bit more local, there's the Purbeck Heaths National Nature Reserve. And this is a large-scale project down in Dorset where, again, they've got landowners working together, so the National Trust, the Wildlife Trust, Natural England and a few others, who are all working together to share grazing livestock across their land holdings. So instead of working in, to see this patchiness and this mosaic of different habitats, which is really important to support a whole range of different species. In Norfolk, we've got a medium-scale project on network, which some of you may know if you saw Spring Watch or Autumn Watch this year. The Wild Kent Hill project, again, they're releasing pigs and horses and cattle as proxy for our once native semi-natural herbivores. They've also got beavers there to restore the wetlands, conservation on the coast, as well as regenerative agriculture. So again, it's a great example of showing how these different land uses and approaches can work together for the benefit of wildlife. Moving through to our coast, so we do have a Somerset example here, and this is a managed realignment that's done a lot of intervention work at the start to manage this coastline and to create new salt marshes. But now they are moving up that rewilding spectrum by reintroducing cattle in low densities and allowing those cattle to move through the landscape to replicate natural grazing patterns. And again, this shows how communities can help to get involved with this. They did a lot of community co-design and engagement in Scotland, but there's lots of marine rewilding projects that are starting to appear. And this is a no-take zone up in the Arran coastline, where they reduced the amount of damaging practices from trawlers, and the bottom dredging fishing approaches to really restore our natural ecosystems. And I think restoring our marine environments can be really hard because there's a lot of pressure on there. But once you take away some of those damaging practices, you really start to see wildlife coming back. And I think it's really important to make sure that we look at marine rewilding as well as terrestrial rewilding, because anything that happens on the land ultimately will affect that marine environment. Any pollution, sedimentation, soil runoff that goes into our rivers will ultimately end up in our marine environments. So we need this joined-up approach to really start to look at how we can restore nature across a whole range of different habitats. So I've just included this map so you can start to see some of the projects that are popping up on the network nearby. We don't have loads in Somerset at the moment, but it is a really, really early network. So hopefully we'll have a few more projects joining the map so that we can start to show some of the things that are happening. And the blue pins on here are local networks that are starting up. So there's lots of local networks, including the Devon network, the Somerset Rewilding network, and a Wiltshire one, that's starting to try and bring together some of this these projects and help to support them for rewilding. So I hope to see the map grow out soon, and if we can get some rewilding in Somerset, that would be fantastic. So I'm just going to wrap up with this slide that I've included, because it's good to look at not only what's happening at the moment, but start to look at how our landscapes could look like in the future. And we know that a lot of our ecosystems have a lot of missing pieces, and a lot of these missing pieces tend to be some of the missing species. So beavers, for example, up in the top corner, we know that they're a really important ecosystem engineer. They restore our wetlands. We've got quite a lot in Somerset, so that's really exciting to see those coming through. And there's a consultation that's just finished on wild beavers in England. So it's great to see that species starting to come back, and that's really helping to restore a lot of our natural processes as well as our biodiversity. But maybe there's some other species that we can think about, maybe white stork. Perhaps on the Somerset levels, at one stage, we might be able to start thinking about things like pelicans coming back. Within our marine environments, we can start looking at oysters and seagrass, and we know that there's a lot of benefits to those, not just for biodiversity, but also for things like carbon. And maybe we can start thinking a little bit bigger, and one day thinking about whether lynx could be supported once again. We know that lynx, when they're present, can really affect deer numbers, but also deer grazing and browsing, which can help to kickstart that natural regeneration of trees and woodlands. Pine martens are really great for controlling grey squirrel populations and hopefully bringing back opportunities for red squirrels. And then finally, birds of prey and eagle, and whether we can maybe start to look to include some carcasses on our land in the future to restore that nutrient cycling and that balance. So just some thoughts there on how we can start to think about what's missing from our countryside and what might we want to start bringing back. So just finally, we've got loads of resources on our website. I've only been able to provide a real snapshot of the projects that are on the network, as well as all the exciting stuff about rewilding. So please do join, look at the website and have a look and explore all of the resources we've got on there, as well as the network map. And just to leave you with this slide, I think rewilding is one long term. We just need to act a little bit wilder. So I'll leave you with that note. Thank you very much.